By the time you get to fully modern humans, around 100,000 years ago in parts of Africa and the Middle East, the evidence becomes unmistakable. Graves at sites like Kafza in modern-day Israel show bodies deliberately positioned, some with red ochre pigment, a mineral early humans used for symbolic and decorative purposes. One burial included a child laid to rest with a deer antler placed carefully in its hands. Nobody put a deer antler in a child's hands by accident. That is a choice. That is a gesture aimed at something beyond the practical. So why did this happen? Why would a species under constant survival pressure, with limited time and energy, choose to spend both on the dead? One answer comes from evolutionary psychology, and it centers on something surprisingly practical. Your ancestors lived in small, interdependent groups where every member's survival depended on the cohesion of the whole. When someone died, especially someone central to the group, a parent, a hunting partner, a caregiver, the loss wasn't just emotional, it was structural. It threatened the stability of everyone left behind. Some researchers argue that early death rituals functioned as a kind of social repair mechanism, a way to publicly process the rupture, reaffirm the group's bonds, and signal to every remaining member that the community was still intact, still capable of continuing. There's a second, deeper answer, and it comes from a field called terror management theory, developed by psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pischinsky, building on ideas from anthropologist Ernest Becker. Their argument is unsettling in its simplicity. Humans are the only species, as far as we know, that fully understands it will die. Not just fears immediate danger, the way a zebra fears a lion in the moment, but comprehends death as a certain, future, unavoidable fact. That knowledge is a psychological problem your ancestors had to solve. And one of the ways early humans solved it, according to this theory, was by building systems of meaning around death itself. Rituals, afterlife beliefs, symbolic burial, anything that suggested death wasn't a total void, that something of the person or the bond or the meaning continued. Look at what early burials actually contain, and you can see this logic playing out. Tools, buried with the dead, as if they'd be needed again. Food remains near graves. Red ochre, possibly meant to mimic the color of blood and life. In later prehistoric sites, entire skeletons are found painted, positioned, facing the rising sun. None of this helped anyone survive in a practical sense. It only makes sense if your ancestors were doing something psychological, trying to answer the question that every human since has had to answer in some form. What happens to a person when they stop being here? Here's the twist that connects all of this directly to you. You didn't inherit specific burial customs from Paleolithic humans. Your funeral, if you've been to one, probably didn't involve red ochre or deer antlers. But you very likely inherited the underlying psychological machinery that made those first rituals necessary in the first place. The same discomfort that pushed a Neanderthal to arrange a body with intention is the same discomfort that makes you avoid thinking about your own mortality. That makes a graveyard feel eerie even in broad daylight. That makes you flinch at the phrase, "What happens after you die?" Modern psychology has actually tested this. Studies using terror management theory find that simply reminding people of their own mortality, something as small as asking them to briefly write about their own death, measurably changes their behavior afterward. People cling more tightly to their cultural worldview. They favor their own group more strongly. They react more harshly to people who challenge their beliefs. In other words, thinking about death doesn't just make you sad. It makes you reach for meaning, for belonging, for something bigger than the fact of the body, which is, essentially, exactly what your ancestors were doing 60,000 years ago in a cave in Iraq. This is why funerals today, whatever culture you look at, tend to share the same underlying structure, even when the specific customs differ wildly. A body is treated with intention, not discarded. A community gathers. Words are spoken about what the person meant. Some object, a flower, a photograph, a keepsake, is placed as if it matters to the person who is gone. None of it is biologically necessary. All of it is psychologically necessary. It's the same instinct that filled a Neanderthal grave with pollen, just wearing modern clothes. So the next time you're at a funeral, or you pass a cemetery, or you catch yourself avoiding a thought about your own mortality, You're not just experiencing a modern social custom, you're running a very old program, one that started the moment some early human looked at a body. You've been to a funeral before. You've stood in a room with flowers arranged just so, quiet music playing, people speaking in hushed voices, everyone dressed the same somber color. It feels ancient. It feels like something humans have always done. But here's the strange part. The specific rituals you associate with death, the caskets, the eulogies, the flowers, are recent inventions. What your ancestors actually did when someone died was stranger, older, and far more revealing about what it means to be human than anything you've witnessed at a modern funeral. To understand this, you have to go back further than any cemetery you've ever visited, further than written history, further than agriculture. You have to go back to a cave in northern Iraq, 60,000 years ago, to a group of Neanderthals, and to one of the most debated discoveries in the history of archaeology. In the 1950s, archaeologist Ralph Selecki was excavating a site called Shanidar Cave. He found a Neanderthal skeleton, and around it, unusually high concentrations of pollen from flowers, yarrow, cornflower, hollyhock. Selecki's conclusion made headlines around the world. He believed this Neanderthal had been buried with flowers, deliberately placed by grieving companions. The idea was electric. It suggested that Neanderthals, long dismissed as brutish and simple, had something startlingly close to funerals. They mourned. They marked death with beauty. Decades later, other researchers pushed back. Some argued the pollen could have blown in naturally or been carried by burrowing rodents. The debate still isn't fully settled. But here's what almost nobody disputes. Multiple Neanderthal sites across Europe and the Middle East show bodies placed in deliberate positions, often curled, sometimes with stone tools or animal bones nearby. Something was happening, something that looked less like abandonment and more like intention. This matters more than it might seem, because burying a body is not the obvious choice. In nature, the obvious choice is to leave it. A dead body attracts predators, spreads disease, offers no survival benefit. From a purely practical standpoint, walking away is safer. And yet, tens of thousands of years before writing, before farming, before permanent settlements, something in early humans and even some of their evolutionary cousins pushed back against that logic. Something made them stay. Something made them dig, arrange, and mark. Archaeologist Paul Pettit, who has spent much of his career studying the origins of mortuary behavior, argues that this moment, the choice to treat a corpse differently than any other object in the environment, may be one of the earliest signs of symbolic thought in the human lineage. Not just intelligence, meaning-making. The body stopped being just a body. It became something that mattered, even after it stopped functioning, that used to move and speak and love, and decided, against every practical instinct, that it deserved to be treated as something more than remains. Your ancestors didn't bury the dead because it made survival easier. They buried the dead because somewhere in the deep past, being human started to mean refusing to let death be the only thing left to say.